Good evening. It is Boomtown Week here at KREM 2, and we begin tonight with exclusive, in-depth coverage on Spokane's growing homeless crisis, which has only gotten worse as more people have moved into our region.
Over the last several years, the city has spent millions of dollars on cleanup, increased policing, and a new shelter, but is it working?
Well, some city leaders say no, and that is why they are looking to Houston, Texas as a model to follow here in Spokane. So I made the trip to Houston to see firsthand what they're doing and if we could do it here as well.
In the past 10 years, we have permanently housed more than 30,000 individuals.
It's a number that gets your attention,
helping us reduce homelessness by over 60%.
And that's a number that seems too good to be true. But in Houston, Texas, it's a reality.
City government said, we're tired of spending tens of millions of dollars every single year. And so local government said, we need to come together and we need to invest in what's ever going to move the needle on homelessness.
Mark Eichenbaum is part of the Houston Mayor's administration focusing on homeless initiatives. For more than a year, he has also worked with Spokane city leaders who visited Houston hoping to learn from their success. He tells me the turning point was in 2012 with the start of a simple policy called Housing First.
We transitioned from being a shelter-based system to being a housing-based system. Shelters are no longer the answer to homelessness.
That's right, the city finds, provides, and pays for housing the homeless, and then focuses on wraparound services like mental health or addiction treatment.
If an intervention said giving yellow lollipops to everybody would reduce homelessness, we'd be doing that. What the data showed, the intervention of housing was by far the most successful.
And he says it's cheaper.
It is more expensive to walk by somebody experiencing homelessness on the streets than just to put them into housing with those wraparound services.
What do you say to the people who will look at this model and say, it should not be the city's responsibility to pay for housing these people?
The reality is that responding to homelessness is now a core service that all cities have to respond to. It is just like making sure that clean water is running through the pipes and toilets are flushing and the streets are being repaired.
According to Houston's point-in-time count, the homeless population was more than 8,000 in 2011 before Housing First got started. It started dropping dramatically, though, as the program gained momentum and has steadily trended down ever since. In that same time frame, Spokane's point-in-time count shows our homeless population has trended up. And today, the total homeless numbers are strikingly similar between the two cities, but eye-opening when you consider Houston's city population is almost 12 times bigger. But finding success in Houston did not happen overnight. It meant outreach agencies like Search, a longtime shelter in Houston, had to change how they operated.
And so years ago, the focus was more on shelter, overnight shelter, kind of providing meals and showers and laundry, things that would help make people's lives more comfortable. That day, right. And now the commitment has shifted to moving people off the streets and keeping them off the streets.
Alexis Loving is now the Search CEO.
Hey, this is my last week.
She tells me some agencies and nonprofits stopped offering things like daily meals or clothing or tents, each one starting to focus on a specific aspect of longer-term solutions.
What we focus on here is case management.
Good afternoon.
That's when outreach specialists hit the streets.
Did you want to check out anything while we're here?
And focus on one individual at a time.
Did you sleep out here last night?
Hoping to bring them into a centralized database for a coordinated assessment.
Are you connected to any services for housing?
It means no matter which agency in the city does that assessment, every individual ends up in the same system.
I've been here in less than 2 years. I can say that I've successfully assisted with housing over 60 people. I did this same job in another state, and I was only able to house 3 people in that program in the 4 years that I worked in that agency.
It also means the city stopped funding things like shelters to direct its resources toward housing.
We're not going to give funding anymore to individual organizations who aren't working with the system.
Mike Nichols is the CEO and president of Houston's Coalition for the Homeless. That's the collective agency made up of all the nonprofits, businesses, philanthropists, and government agencies that make up the city's centralized system. He's also spent time in Spokane and has seen firsthand our city's growing crisis. He tells me there is another way.
Get the people into housing. You can see the difference. Just like you have beautiful parks, spectacular parks, because you believe that these parks should be beautiful and the government spending on those are worthwhile. This is the same thing.
I think you come with a unique perspective, obviously having seen success here in Houston, but you have visited Spokane. You have spent time in our city. What are we doing wrong?
I think one of the things is the idea of having one place for all the people experiencing homelessness to go live is going to be problematic. It's expensive, but how can you focus on getting these folks into housing?
It's also important to note Houston has no citywide zoning, which means more affordable housing can often be built just about anywhere.
We like apartments. We're a pro-apartment community.
The funding that we do have to address homelessness is not sustainable.
If I was speaking to the mayor of Spokane, I'd say, be a pro-housing community.
But city leaders say Houston funds its homeless initiatives with almost all federal dollars, not city money. And it's the same funding Spokane has access to as well.
Homelessness is increasing because of the lack of housing. And if we don't seize the opportunity and respond right now, it's only going to become too big of a crisis, too deep of a hole to try to dig out of. But that window of opportunity is there right now, and Spokane can definitely seize upon it.
Make no mistake, homelessness is still an issue here in Houston. It is not 100% solved. In fact, while we were here talking to city leaders at City Hall, there was a man who had overdosed here just on the other side of the park. He was passed out on the sidewalk and first responders had to come and rush him off to the hospital. I'm told he will likely be approached later and hopefully be brought into this Houston centralized system to eventually get him off of the streets. City leaders here tell me it is that centralized response that will likely be the first step towards success for Spokane.
So very, very interesting trip to Houston. It was just kind of eye-opening to see how differently they do things. And a lot of the video that you saw from that story was actually from several years ago, before they really maximized the results of this. It doesn't look like that anymore, and we could definitely see that. It was very hard to find people who were homeless living on the streets in most of the city.
It was just surprising to me to see the difference in population between Houston and Spokane, obviously huge, and we are approaching roughly the same number of homeless population here in Spokane compared to Houston.
I know. So the question everyone wants to know is, could we possibly do these same types of things here in Spokane? And it would obviously require a very significant change in where Spokane is putting its resources. So just over the last year, we have seen a lot of just millions of dollars being poured into the brand new shelter out on Trent. We've seen the Catholic Charities Catalyst Project in the West Hills. They have certainly been successful in shutting down Camp Hope, for example, and getting people more into the shelters and off of the streets. But they are certainly not a long-term solution, at least not according to the Houston model.
Yeah, so you spent several days down there. What stood out the most to you in terms of differences?
All of the different agencies that we talked to, every single one, they have fully bought into this system. Whether it's a charity organization, whether it's a philanthropy, they're not all doing their own thing and just kind of talking to the city about what they're doing. They are all part of one cohesive system, and it certainly made a difference. Obviously, nothing else happens unless housing comes first. They said everything else comes second. They focus on the people who are the most vulnerable, the people who have the worst addiction problems, the worst mental illness. Those are the ones they say who need housing the most.
Yeah, well, the numbers show it's at least working for them.
Certainly is. There is actually more to this story, though. My colleague from our morning show, Channing Curtis, also went with me to Houston. So tomorrow on Up with KREM, we continue our exclusive coverage on Houston's homeless solutions. She will bring us an in-depth report on the Housing First program and how it works.